Fine, let's start. Number 1. The Gunung Padang Builders, Indonesia, the mountain culture of West Java. High in the volcanic uplands of West Java, near the village of Karyamukti in Cianjur Regency, an ancient people stacked a hill into a sequence of stone platforms. The civilization that did this remains nameless. Their site sits roughly 50 kilometers southwest of the Regency capital, perched at about 885 meters above sea level. From a distance, the place looks like a forested cone. Up close, it reveals what they actually built. 5 stone terraces stacked across the summit, each terrace bounded and paved with dark, prismatic blocks of volcanic rock. Whoever ran this project aligned the complex broadly along a northwest to southeast axis. A long traditional stairway, worn by centuries of pilgrim feet, climbs to the highest level. Their inheritors call the place Gunung Padang, which means roughly the Mountain of Light, or the Mountain of Enlightenment. The civilization's choice of building material is the first technical clue about who they were. The blocks are andesite or basalt-like volcanic columns, formed when thick lava cooled slowly underground. As the rock contracts during cooling, it fractures into long polygonal shafts. Geologists call this columnar jointing, and you can see the same physics in places like the Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland or Devil's Tower in Wyoming. At Gunung Padang, those natural columns appear to have been pried loose, dragged into position, and stacked as retaining walls, curbs, and step risers. To put the engineering in modern terms, this was a society with access to a quarry that delivered ready-cut stone pillars, and a workforce organized to choose, move, and arrange them. Mainstream Indonesian archaeology classifies these people as a megalithic ritual culture, likely active within the last few thousand years and continuing into the historical period. That reading is secure. The controversy begins below the surface. A team led by geologist Danny Hillman Nadawijaja argued, in a series of papers and a 2023 publication later retracted, that ground-penetrating radar, electrical resistivity tomography, seismic surveys, drilling, and radiocarbon samples revealed multiple buried construction phases, suggesting an older, deeper civilization underneath. The proposed dates ranged from about 9,000 years before, present in the upper layers, down to 27,000 years in the deepest. Critics, including a coalition of international archaeologists, pushed back. The core objection is straightforward. Old organic carbon trapped in volcanic soil does not automatically date a human-built structure above it. The world's oldest pyramid claim remains unverified. 3 theories sit on the table. The mainstream view treats the visible builders as a late prehistoric society working with local stone. An archaeological and geological reading allows that natural lava formations beneath the site may have been later modified by humans, possibly across more than one cultural horizon. A more speculative position imagines an Ice Age civilization organized for large-scale stone engineering before agriculture. Tropical erosion, the absence of writing, and continued sacred use have all blurred who these people really were. Did nature's fractures simply become humanity's first building blocks? Or did later peoples inherit a hill and turn it into something more? Hold that question, because the next civilization shows what happens when an entire village vanishes, not into a hill, but into the sea. Number 2, the Atlit Yam People, Israel, the village beneath the Mediterranean. About 200 to 400 meters off the coast at Atlit, just south of Haifa, divers descend through 8 to 12 meters of Mediterranean water and land in the streets of a Neolithic civilization. Archaeologists call them the people of Atlit Yam, and the site has been investigated since 1984, primarily by the underwater archaeologist Ehud Galili of the Israel Antiquities Authority. Calibrated radiocarbon dates place this civilization between roughly 9,100 and 8,500 years before present, which corresponds to the late 8th and 7th millennia before the Common Era. Culturally, they belong to the transition between the late pre-pottery Neolithic B and pre-pottery Neolithic sea horizons of the Levant. Their settlement covers approximately 4 to 6 hectares. These people survive in the record because they skipped the usual fate of Neolithic villagers. Most are dismantled, plowed over, or rebuilt for thousands of years. This community was simply drowned. As Mediterranean sea level rose after the last ice age, the shoreline marched inland and sealed the civilization under sediment, preserving timber, plant remains, and even human bodies. Stone foundations of rectangular houses still trace out their neighborhoods on the seabed. Above those foundations, the original mud brick or clay walls have long since dissolved. At the center of the settlement is the most striking technical signature of this civilization, a stone-lined freshwater well roughly 1.5 meters across and several meters deep. In modern terms, it is a piece of village infrastructure, a community water utility hand-cut into bedrock. As salt water pushed inland, that well likely turned brackish, then unusable, a slow death for an entire settled people. Their economy mixed several lifeways. Residents fished from the nearby shore, kept domestic cattle, goats, and pigs, and grew crops like emmer wheat. Grinding stones recovered from house floors show how they processed grain into flour. Their hunters added wild species, and gatherers contributed plants from the surrounding wetlands. There is also a ritual layer. 7 upright megaliths, set in a semicircle around a freshwater spring, carry small cup marks pecked into their surfaces by these people's hands. Cup marks at other Neolithic sites are linked to libation, offering, or water-related ceremony. Their burials remain in place, including a famous double interment of a woman and infant. Genetic analysis of their bones identified ancient Mycobacterium tuberculosis, one of the earliest direct molecular signatures of human tuberculosis on record, a piece of biological evidence that came directly from this civilization's bodies. 3 readings emerge. The mainstream view is straightforward. These were a coastal agro-pastoral fishing people ended by sea level rise. An interpretive view emphasizes their megaliths and spring as evidence of a society that exercised ritual control over water itself. A speculative angle sometimes links such drowned civilizations to global flood myths, although the physical evidence here points to a regional environmental loss rather than any planetary catastrophe. If a single village can vanish like this, what about whole networks of cities? That question opens the next chapter. Number 3. The Cucuteni-Trypillia, Europe's giant cities without kings. Stretching across what is now Romania, Moldova, and Ukraine, the Cucuteni-Trypillia civilization flourished between roughly 5050 and 2950 before the Common Era. They carried 2 names because they were first identified in different national traditions. Romanian and Moldovan archaeologists call them Cucuteni, after a site near Iași, excavated in the late 1800s. Ukrainian researchers, beginning with Vikenty Kvoika in the 1890s, called them Trypillia, sometimes Latinized as Trypillia, after a village south of Kyiv. This civilization occupied the fertile forest steppe and river valleys north and west of the Black Sea, an environment well suited to mixed farming. Their signature ceramics are famous in Eastern European museums, painted with spirals, meanders, and complex symbolic motifs in red, black, and white. The most striking thing about this people is the scale at which they built. Some of their settlements covered between 200 and 450 hectares, what archaeologists now call megasites. To translate, that is up to roughly 4.5 square kilometers of continuous habitation, larger than many medieval European cities thousands of years later. Their major examples include Talyanki, Maidanetske, Nebelivka, and Dobrovody, all in central Ukraine. Maidanetske offers the clearest technical picture of how these people organize space. Geophysical surveys directed by John Chapman and Biserka Gajdarska, in collaboration with Ukrainian colleagues, mapped about 2,950 Cucuteni-Trypillian houses arranged in concentric rings, with radial pathways crossing the rings and broad open spaces near the center. The houses themselves were wattle and daub, framed in timber and plastered with clay, and many appear to have had 2 stories. Inside, residents installed clay platforms, ovens, storage bins, and small ritual objects. Population estimates for this civilization remain contested, ranging from a few thousand seasonal occupants up to 10 or 20,000 or more permanent residents. The harder question is whether to call these people city dwellers. They had urban scale. They had urban planning. They lacked the things our textbooks usually associate with early urban civilizations: palaces, royal tombs, monumental temples, written tablets, and clear evidence of armies. Their economy combined cereals, pulses, cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs with manure-managed fields supporting long-term productivity. Copper tools appear, but stone, bone, ceramic, and organic implements remained dominant. 3 theories try to make sense of who they were. The mainstream reading accepts them as a large agro-pastoral people with sophisticated planning, but stops short of calling them a state. A social and archaeological view, advanced by researchers like David Wengrow and the late David Graeber, suggests that the Cucuteni-Trypillians had low inequality and a strange pattern of repeated burning every 60 to 80 years that may reflect community renewal, inheritance control, or a ritualized urban reset. A more speculative reading frames them as a forgotten, matrilineal, or goddess-centered civilization, an idea that fuels imagination but lacks decisive proof. The paradox closes the section. Here was a people who could plan and build settlements rivaling small modern towns, then deliberately set them on fire and start again. From a civilization that destroyed itself, the trail now leads to a continent that destroyed itself geologically. Number 4. The Sundalanders, a drowned civilization of the Asian shelf. Sundaland is not a myth. It is a geological term for the exposed continental shelf that during the last ice age connected mainland Southeast Asia with Sumatra, Java, Borneo, and a constellation of smaller islands. The civilization that lived on it has no surviving name, but their world was real. During the last glacial maximum, around 21,000 years ago, global sea level sat roughly 120 meters lower than today. That drop turned the shallow seas of the modern region into dry plains, river valleys, and lake basins, and the Sundalanders walked through them. Reconstructions of bathymetry and post-glacial sea level rise indicate that roughly half of Sundaland's exposed landmass disappeared between about 15,000 and 7,000 years ago. As the water returned, modern Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines took shape on what had once been their hinterland. In modern terms, an area comparable to a subcontinent was deleted from the human map within a few millennia, taking a civilization with it. The most well-known speculative framework about these people is the Eden in the East hypothesis, proposed in 1998 by the geneticist and physician Stephen Oppenheimer. He argued that the post-Ice Age floods scattered the Sundalanders outward, carrying agricultural, maritime, and mythological knowledge into India, the Pacific, and even the Middle East. He linked the drowning of their world to flood myths recorded across Eurasia, and to the development of seafaring traditions, including outrigger-style boats. Mainstream linguistics, however, anchors the so-called Austronesian expansion in Taiwan, beginning around 5,000 years ago. Genetic studies have complicated that simple, Taiwan-only model by showing deep continuity in island Southeast Asian populations, long before Taiwanese arrivals. Continuity that traces back to the Sundalanders themselves. There are evolutionary steps leading up to their seafaring world. Plant management of tubers and fruits, dugout boat technology, and coastal foraging traditions all developed gradually within this civilization before any unified Austronesian dispersal. The archaeological problem with proving who they were is brutal. The best coastal sites in this story are now underwater, buried under tropical mud, coral, peat, and marine sediment. Surveys are slow and expensive, and many shallow seas obscure their floors completely. Three theories run in parallel. The mainstream view holds that the Sundalanders were complex foragers and early coastal communities, but no proven civilization in the formal sense. An archaeological and historical reading allows that the flooding displaced a real maritime people who carried genuine skills into island Southeast Asia, shaping later cultures. A speculative interpretation, championed in popular books, treats Sundaland as a major lost civilization standing behind later Asian and Pacific myths. Across all three, the same constraint applies. Sometimes a civilization is missing from prehistory, not because its people were simple, but because their world is now the seafloor. The Sundalanders are the largest example. They are not the only one. Number 5. The Doggerlanders, the Mesolithic civilization of the North Sea world. If you sail today from the eastern coast of England toward the Netherlands, Germany, or Denmark, you cross the southern North Sea. 12,000 years ago, you would have been walking through the homeland of a vanished people. That homeland has a name, Doggerland, given by the archaeologist Bryony Coles in the 1990s. Their world was a vast plain stitching Britain to continental Europe. During the late Pleistocene and early Holocene, it carried rivers, marshes, lakes, estuaries, woodlands, and a shifting coastline. Red deer, aurochs, wild boar, beaver, fish, and seabirds populated the wetlands they hunted. The Doggerlanders themselves were Mesolithic hunter-fisher-gatherers, not farmers, not city builders. They moved seasonally through wetland corridors, exploited rivers and coasts, and almost certainly used dugout canoes, judging by similar Mesolithic finds preserved in lakes elsewhere in northern Europe. Their technological footprint is small but precise. Their stone tools include microliths, scrapers, blades, and composite projectile points hafted into wooden shafts. Microliths in particular are tiny, geometrically shaped flakes that they could insert in series along an arrow or harpoon, a kind of modular weapon system. Bone and antler from Doggerlander sites also survived because the cold, oxygen-poor sediments of the North Sea preserve organic material remarkably well. The most famous artifact left by these people, the Kalinda harpoon, was dredged up by a fishing trawler in 1931. It is a barbed antler point, made from red deer bone or antler, originally hafted as a fishing or hunting weapon by a Doggerlander hand. Decorated bone artifacts from the wider region show that this civilization also engaged in symbolic marking, scratching patterns into surfaces in ways comparable to other contemporary Mesolithic groups in Scandinavia. Modern recovery of the Doggerlanders relies on a hybrid toolkit. Trawlers continue to bring up their bones and tools by accident. Industrial dredging for sand and gravel produces material that researchers screen for evidence of the civilization. Seismic survey data, originally collected by oil and gas companies, has been reused to map their buried river systems. Cores extracted from the seabed provide peat, pollen, and ancient DNA, painting a picture of changing vegetation and animal life across their world. Three theories converge. The mainstream view treats the Doggerlanders as a low-lying civilization gradually drowned by post-glacial sea level rise. An archaeological and event-based theory adds the Storegga Slide, a massive submarine landslide off Norway around 6,200 before the Common Era, which generated tsunamis that devastated the remaining coastal areas these people still occupied. A speculative reading proposes that European flood memories preserve fragments of the Doggerlanders' loss, an idea that is plausible but unproven. Without writing, with mobile lifeways, and with sediment burial sealing the evidence, this people left only fragments. A civilization, it turns out, does not need pyramids in order to disappear. From a drowned civilization without metal, the next stop is a people with copper, ceramics, and signs that nearly look like writing. Number 6. The Vinča, metallurgy, symbols, and the Balkan Neolithic. Between roughly 5,400 and 4,500 before the Common Era, a dense and skilled Neolithic civilization spread across what is now Serbia, Romania, Bulgaria, Kosovo, and North Macedonia, with influence into surrounding regions. Archaeologists call them the Vinča, named after the type site Vinča Belo Brdo on the Danube near Belgrade. The Serbian archaeologist Miloje Vasic began excavating the site in 1908, eventually identifying a deep stratified mound that the Vinča people had built over generations. That kind of mound is called a tell, formed when generations rebuild houses on the ruins of older houses. Each rebuilding raises the surface, layer by layer, sometimes by several meters. To translate into modern terms, a tell is essentially a slow-motion apartment building, where each Vinča generation lived one floor above its ancestors. Vinča houses were timber-framed, with walls of woven branches packed with clay, a technique called wattle and daub. Their floors were beaten clay, often replastered. Some houses appear to have had substantial upper levels, suggesting two-story domestic architecture. Their settlements were dense, rectilinear, and frequently rebuilt in place. Many were unfortified, indicating relatively low levels of organized warfare during the civilization's peak. Their economy combined cereal farming, animal husbandry, hunting, fishing, and a high degree of craft specialization. Their polished black, gray, and red burnished pottery is one signature. Another is their figurines, often modeled with triangular or mask-like faces, sometimes with bird-like beaks and stylized eyes. Two technical achievements push the Vinča toward the edge of civilization in the strict sense. The first is metallurgy. At Belovod, in eastern Serbia, a team led by Miljana Radivojević and Thilo Rarin documented evidence that these people were smelting copper as early as around 5000 BCE. That places early Balkan pyrometallurgy near the turn of the 6th to 5th millennium before the Common Era, with the Vinča as one of its key practitioners. Smelting requires controlled, high-temperature furnaces, an understanding of which ores yield metal, and the ability to separate copper from slag. There are evolutionary steps leading up to this point. People worked native copper by hammering for centuries before learning to extract metal from green and blue ores by heat, and the Vinča were among the first to make that leap. The second achievement is symbolic. Incised signs appear on Vinča pottery, figurines, spindle whorls, and small clay tablets. Some signs repeat. 3 theories follow. The mainstream view holds that the Vinča used these signs as symbolic marks, ownership marks, or ritual codes, not a confirmed writing system. An archaeological and historical view treats Vinča copper as evidence of an independent metallurgical civilization in Eurasia, parallel to and possibly older than developments in the Near East. A speculative reading promotes the Vinča signs as humanity's first true script, a position that remains intriguing without decipherable language behind it. From a copper-working civilization with bull figurines and proto-symbols, the trail leads naturally to a society that turned all 3 into something even more ambitious. Number 7. The Liangzhu. Jade, rice, dams, and the flooded state. In the lower Yangtze River Delta, near modern Hangzhou in Zhejiang Province, the Liangzhu civilization flourished between approximately 3,300 and 2,300 before the Common Era. UNESCO, which inscribed Liangzhu City as a World Heritage Site in 2019, identifies them as an early regional state founded on rice agriculture, social differentiation, and a unified belief system. In modern terms, that means the Liangzhu had the 3 textbook ingredients of a civilization: a productive agricultural base, ranked classes, and an integrating ideology, all centuries before the first historical Chinese dynasties. Their capital at Liangzhu City was a planned urban center with bounded space defined by walls and earthworks. Wet rice agriculture provided the economic foundation, But rice paddies are not casual investments. They require coordinated water control, leveled fields, careful seasonal management, and substantial labor. Liangzhu engineers responded with one of the most ambitious hydraulic systems in the prehistoric world. Reconstructions describe a network of dams, reservoirs, levees, and canals covering roughly 100 square kilometers around their city. Their dams managed seasonal floods, stored water for paddies, and stabilized agriculture against the unpredictable Yangtze. To put that in modern terms, the Liangzhu were running a regional flood control authority and an irrigation district at the same time, without writing as we know it. Their society was clearly stratified. Elite Liangzhu burials contained large numbers of jade objects. Commoner graves included far fewer prestige goods and more ordinary ceramics. Jade is hard, harder than iron in some respects, and cannot be cut with simple chisels. Liangzhu craftspeople worked it through abrasion with quartz sand, drilling with hollow tubes and hard sands, and laborious polishing. The Kong, a tube square on the outside and circular on the inside, often carved with deity mask imagery, may represent how this civilization thought about the relationship between heaven and earth. The Bai disk, a flat circular jade with a central hole, carried possible cosmological meaning. Across many objects, a recurring staring deity face, with prominent eyes and a feathered headdress, marks a shared iconography that bound the Liangzhu people together. Three theories interpret their collapse. The mainstream view places the Liangzhu as an early state-like rice civilization, with ritual elites that ended in the late 3rd millennium before the Common Era. An archaeological collapse theory points to catastrophic flooding or climate instability around 2300 BCE as the trigger that ended them. A speculative reading treats the Liangzhu as a forgotten priest kingdom whose carved symbols encode a lost cosmology, an idea limited by the absence of a decoded script. From a rice-based civilization in East Asia, the trail now jumps an ocean. Number 8. The Norte Chico, the oldest civilization in the Americas. On Peru's north-central coast, in the river valleys of Supe, Pativilca, Fortaleza, and Huara, a network of more than 30 interlinked urban or ceremonial centers belonging to a single civilization emerged between roughly 3000 and 1800 before the Common Era. Archaeologists call this people the Norte Chico, and their showcase city is Corral, in the dry desert valley of the Supi River. UNESCO describes the sacred city of Corral Sup as the oldest center of civilization in the Americas, with a site footprint of about 626 hectares, and dates the urbanism the Norte Chico produced to roughly 5,000 years ago. Their architecture is monumental and unmistakable. Corral features platform mounds, stepped pyramids, large plazas, and ceremonial courts arranged across the desert terrace above the river. One distinctive form they used is the sunken circular plaza, a recessed amphitheater used for gatherings and ritual, which becomes a recurring feature of every Andean civilization that followed them. Their largest structure, the Piramide Mare, is often described as roughly 160 meters by 150 meters at the base, rising about 18 meters high. Their construction relied on stone, earth fill, and a particular technical solution called shikra. Norte Chico workers wove fiber bags from local reeds, filled them with rocks, and stacked the bags into the cores of the mounds. The bags acted as flexible structural units, distributing seismic stress, an elegant earthquake-resistant engineering choice for a people living in a tectonically active region. What makes the Norte Chico especially striking is what they did not have. This civilization was pre-ceramic during its main fluorescence. There are no fired clay pots in the standard inventory. They adapted cooking around the missing technology, using roasting pits, hot stones, gourds, and basketry containers. Their economy ran on a cotton fishing exchange. Inland Norte Chico communities grew cotton, which was woven into nets and lines and traded to coastal Norte Chico communities for anchovies, sardines, and shellfish. The archaeologists Ruth Shady Solis, who has led research at Corral since the 1990s, and Jonathan Haas, whose work expanded the picture across the wider Norte Chico, have emphasized that this exchange, not grain surplus alone, fueled their urban growth. Quipu-like knotted string devices recovered from Corral are among the earliest known in the Americas and may suggest forms of accounting or record-keeping by these people. 3 theories follow. The mainstream view treats the Norte Chico as a peaceful, ritual-centered early Andean civilization with little evidence of warfare. An economic and archaeological reading emphasizes that for them, cotton and fish drove urban development long before agricultural surplus dominated the Andean story. A speculative interpretation proposes that their Quipu-like objects preserve a lost pre-writing code, a possibility limited by the absence of decoded data. From a desert civilization without pottery, the trail now turns to a civilization without streets. Number 9. The Çatalhöyük People, the rooftop civilization of ancestors. In the Konya Plain of central Anatolia, in modern Turkey, a Neolithic civilization built a settlement called Çatalhöyük between roughly 7,400 and 6,200 before the Common Era. At their peak, perhaps 8,000 of these people lived together in a single town. They were identified and made famous by the British archaeologist James Mellart in the late 1950s and early 1960s, then reinvestigated under the direction of Ian Hodder beginning in the 1990s. UNESCO inscribed their site as a World Heritage Site and describes it specifically as a streetless settlement where residents accessed houses through openings in the roof. The layout of their civilization is the first thing to grasp. Their houses were built directly against one another, sharing walls, with no streets, no alleys, and no public squares between them. Movement happened on top. The Çatalhöyük people walked across a continuous landscape of flat mud brick roofs, climbing up and down through holes accessed by wooden ladders. To translate, this civilization's transportation network was its own roof. The same opening that let a person down into a home also let smoke escape from the hearth and oven below. Their walls were mud brick, plastered smooth on the inside. Their interiors included raised platforms, hearths, and storage areas. Many houses were rebuilt in place across generations of these people, contributing to the slow rise of the settlement mound. The strangest and most informative feature of this civilization is what lay under the floors. Residents buried their dead beneath the platforms inside their own houses. Bodies were flexed, often wrapped in cloth or matting, sometimes placed in baskets and tucked beneath the living space. Some skulls were later removed, replastered to recreate facial features, painted and curated, presumably as ancestor objects. To put it in modern terms, every Çatalhöyük house functioned as both a residence and a small private mausoleum. Their walls and platforms carried elaborate murals, including wild cattle, vultures, deer, leopards, and complex geometric designs. Bucrania, real bullhorns and skulls, were sometimes installed directly into walls and benches, fusing animal, ritual, and architecture in a way unique to this people. 3 theories follow. The mainstream view treats the Çatalhöyük civilization as an unusually dense, Neolithic proto-urban society with limited centralized hierarchy. A social and archaeological interpretation, developed especially by Ian Hodder's team, argues that ritual power among these people was household-based rather than concentrated in any central temple or palace. A more speculative reading promotes goddess-centered or matriarchal interpretations of their society, an attractive but evidentially ambiguous position. From a civilization built around its own ancestors, the path now leads to a people whose ritual architecture predates farming itself. Number 10. The Göbekli Tepe builders. Monumental civilization before farming. In the Gürmüş Mountains near Şanlıurfa in southeastern Turkey, on a limestone ridge overlooking the Harran Plain, sits Göbekli Tepe, the work of a civilization that should not, by textbook timelines, have existed. excavated under the German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt from 1995 until his death in 2014, and continued by colleagues at the German Archaeological Institute. The site has reorganized the timeline of civilization itself. UNESCO, which inscribed Göbekli Tepe in 2018, describes its monumental enclosures as the work of hunter-gatherer peoples in the pre-pottery Neolithic. The main occupation of these builders falls between roughly 9,600 and 8,200 before the Common Era. Their architecture is unforgettable. The Göbekli Tepe builders raised a series of circular and oval ceremonial enclosures, each defined by tall T-shaped limestone pillars, set into stone benches and walls. Their largest pillars rise up to 5.5 meters and weigh several tons each. Two larger paired pillars stand in the center of every enclosure, facing each other across the space these people gathered in. The T-shape itself is widely interpreted as anthropomorphic, a horizontal head atop a vertical body with arms, hands, a belt, and a loincloth carved in low relief, a stylized self-portrait of the civilization that built it. Their surface carvings on the pillars include foxes, snakes, boars, scorpions, vultures, gazelles, ducks, and wild cattle. The imagery is overwhelmingly wild. Domestic animals are essentially absent, which fits the pre-pottery Neolithic context, before clear evidence of livestock domestication in this region. The labor problem is central to this civilization's significance. Their pillars were quarried directly from nearby limestone bedrock, cut, finished, and dragged into position. Erecting a 5-meter pillar weighing several tons requires ropes, levers, sledges, ramps, and enough coordinated workers to move each piece without shattering it. There are no obvious permanent settlements adjacent to the site, which suggests that the Göbekli Tepe builders were a mobile or distributed people whose work parties traveled. Feasting evidence supports this. Excavators found large stone vessels and troughs of theirs, some capable of holding around 165 liters, alongside butchered remains of aurochs and gazelle and wild cereal residues. Communal cooking and beer-like fermented beverages may have provided the social glue that bound the civilization together at gatherings. 3 theories cluster around them. The mainstream view treats the Göbekli Tepe builders as a complex hunter-gatherer civilization that converged on a ritual gathering site. A social and archaeological theory, advanced by Schmidt and others, suggests that their feasting and ritual cooperation helped create the conditions that later supported agriculture, effectively reversing the textbook order of farming, surplus, and monumental architecture, meaning this people invented civilization before they invented farming. A speculative reading proposes that their carvings encode lost astronomical or mythic knowledge, including, in some popular accounts, a cometary catastrophe, an interpretation that remains contested. With 10 civilizations on the table, certain patterns now emerge. Water is one of them. Water is the great eraser of prehistoric civilizations. Across these 10 peoples, water plays a double role. It is both the substance that supports life and the force that ends civilizations. The Atlit Yam villagers depended on a freshwater well for drinking and cooking, and were destroyed when marine transgression pushed salt water inland. The Sundalanders inhabited an entire continental shelf that sustained Ice Age coastal life until rising seas swallowed their world across thousands of years. The Doggerlanders lost their homeland to slow flooding and possibly the catastrophic Storegga tsunami around 6,200 BCE. The Liangzhu mastered water through dams, reservoirs, and canals across about 100 square kilometers, then collapsed amid signs of catastrophic flooding around 2,300 BCE. Even the Norte Chico, in a dry desert, depended absolutely on the seasonal flow of the Supi River to feed cotton and food crops. 2 technical concepts help organize the fates of these civilizations. The first is marine transgression, the geological term for the landward movement of a shoreline during sea level rise. As water advances over previously dry terrain, it inundates the fields, foundations, wells, and graves of whoever is living there, effectively converting a civilization's territory into seabed. The second is salinization, the contamination of freshwater systems by seawater. Salinization destroys the wells that villages drink from, kills the crops that feed civilizations, and renders settlements uninhabitable long before the buildings themselves are submerged. Sediment burial is the third factor, and it cuts both ways. On one hand, it can preserve organic material, including timber, bone, plant remains, and even soft tissue, by sealing it from oxygen, which is why we know anything about the Atlit Yam People or the Doggerlanders at all. On the other hand, it makes excavation extraordinarily difficult, since underwater sites are obscured by silt, currents, and limited visibility. Three theoretical frames apply across these civilizations. The mainstream view holds that post-glacial sea level rise erased huge zones of coastal settlement worldwide, leaving land archaeology with a systematic blind spot, and probably erasing entire civilizations we will never name. An archaeological and historical reading treats local flood memories preserved in oral tradition as fragmented memories of real environmental events that ended real peoples, not literal global catastrophes. A speculative position treats drowned lands as the source of global lost continent legends, including Atlantis-style narratives. The modern relevance is direct. Contemporary sea level rise is again threatening coastal heritage, from Pacific atolls to Mediterranean port cities. The sea is not empty space on the map. It is one of prehistory's largest archives of forgotten civilizations. If water hides a great deal, what about the labor that built what remains visible above the waterline? Monumental labor before written states. Several of these civilizations built things that still stand, or that left foundations measurable in hundreds of meters, without the bureaucratic infrastructure that later empires used. The Göbekli Tepe builders show hunter-gatherers organizing the quarry, transport, and erection of multi-ton limestone pillars. The Norte Chico show monumental platform mounds rising 18 meters in a preceramic civilization without obvious warfare. The Liangzhu show centralized water engineering across 100 square kilometers before any Chinese dynasty appears in written history. The Cucuteni-Trypillia show planned settlements with thousands of houses, but no clear palace district. The Gunung Padang builders, at minimum, show how a civilization can reorganize natural geological features into ritual architecture. The pattern is clear. Monumentality does not always equal empire. The technical concept here is labor mobilization. Mobilization means a civilization's ability to organize people, food, materials, scheduling, and shared purpose toward a single project. In modern terms, building a 5-meter pillar or a kilometer of dam is a logistics problem before it is an engineering problem. You need to feed the workers, plan their travel, supply their tools, and coordinate their tasks across days, seasons, and years. Communal architecture is the alternative model to royal architecture. Rituals, feasts, ancestor veneration, and seasonal gatherings can mobilize labor as effectively as any king. The repeated burning of Cucuteni-Trypillia houses, the rooftop ancestor burials of the Çatalhöyük People, the feasting troughs of the Göbekli Tepe builders, and the cotton fishing exchange of the Norte Chico all suggest community-driven civilizations of effort. Quarrying and transport are the constraints these civilizations had to solve. Moving stone requires leverage, rollers, sledges, ropes, ramps, or sheer manpower. Their construction materials varied: limestone for the Göbekli Tepe builders, columnar volcanic rock for the Gunung Padang builders, mud brick for the Çatalhöyük People, jade and rammed earth for the Liangzhu, woven shikra fiber bags for the Norte Chico, wattle and daub for the Vinča and Cucuteni-Trypillia. Three theories run together. The mainstream view holds that monuments emerge from social cooperation and ritual authority within these civilizations. An archaeological and social theory adds that feasting and ceremony converted surplus labor into architecture, with food and drink as the medium of payment. A speculative theory often attributes their unexplained monuments to lost advanced cultures behind these civilizations, although simpler engineering can still produce remarkable results. Modern experimental archaeology, including stone-moving experiments at sites like Stonehenge and replica mud brick construction in the Levant, supports the idea that organized communities, not vanished superpowers, did the work. Yet these same civilizations also developed signs, marks, and symbols. That topic deserves its own comparison. Symbol systems before writing. Across these 10 civilizations, multiple visual communication systems approached writing without necessarily becoming it. The Vinča marked signs on pottery, figurines, spindle whorls, and small tablets with repeated forms suggesting shared meaning, but no demonstrated grammar. The Liangzhu carried recurring deity mask imagery on jade, the Kong's quartered cosmology, and the Bai-disc's circular geometry, hinting at structured religious ideas without recoverable text. The Çatalhöyük People communicated about animals, danger, memory, and household ritual through repeated visual themes on their walls. The Göbekli Tepe builders used wild animals as a structured symbolic vocabulary of the sacred. The Cucuteni-Trypillia used spirals, meanders, and painted patterns on their ceramics as identity markers, possibly tied to lineage, settlement, or ritual role. The Norte Chico used quipu-like chords with knotted strings in arrangements that may suggest accounting or ritual recording. The technical distinction matters. Writing, defined narrowly, is a system of repeated signs that encodes language. By that definition, none of these civilizations qualify securely as literate. They had symbolic systems. Some may be proto-writing, where signs encode standardized meanings without yet recording sentences. Others are mnemonic devices, prompts that help a trained user recall a memorized text or accounting record. Semiotics, the academic study of signs and meaning, distinguishes between symbol, notation, mnemonic, and script in exactly these terms. The point is not that these prehistoric civilizations failed. The point is that non-written systems can still organize complex society, mark identity, transmit ritual knowledge, and structure economic exchange. 3 theories cover the field. The mainstream view holds that most of these civilizations used symbolic, not proven writing systems. An archaeological and interpretive view accepts that some peoples, particularly the Vinča and the Norte Chico with their quipus, may have used early forms of record-keeping or proto-writing. A speculative reading proposes that their systems preserve lost scriptures, calendars, or astronomical codes, an idea that gains traction only where statistical evidence of patterning supports it. Modern relevance is real. Machine learning and pattern recognition tools, applied to large image datasets of these civilization symbols, are now helping researchers classify recurring forms with new precision. Long before people wrote words, these civilizations wrote identity into stone, clay, bone, jade, wall paint, and cord. Writing is one outcome of that process, not the whole story. And once a civilization marks identity, the question of who has more identity, more goods, or more power becomes archaeologically visible. Civilizations without obvious kings. The 10 civilizations span a wide range of social organization. The Çatalhöyük people showed dense urban living with relatively similar houses, similar burial treatments, and limited evidence of central authority. The Cucuteni-Trypillia show enormous settlements with thousands of houses and no obvious palace, royal tomb, or fortress. The Norte Chico show monumental coordination with little evidence of warfare, no walls aimed at defense, and platform mounds that read as collective rather than royal projects. The Vinča show craft sophistication, dense settlement, and copper smelting without clear fortification across most of their history. The Liangzhu, by contrast, show clear elite differentiation, with jade-rich tombs separated from commoner burials in both quantity and quality of grave goods. The technical concept here is social stratification, the unequal access to status, labor, ritual goods, or resources within a civilization. Stratification can appear in many forms. In graves, with prestige objects concentrated among certain individuals. In houses, with larger or better appointed structures for elites. In diet, with isotopic differences between groups. In trauma, with violence concentrated on lower status bodies. In prestige goods, with imported or labor-intensive items distributed unevenly. And in settlement planning, with central spaces controlled by privileged groups. Modern researchers sometimes apply Gini-style household wealth analysis, originally an economic metric, to compare house sizes and grave goods across these civilizations. The results often show much lower inequality among peoples like the Cucuteni-Trypillia than at later urban centers in the same regions. Absence of palaces does not prove these civilizations were equal, and presence of monuments does not prove they were tyrannies. Authority can be distributed through household-based ritual, lineage councils, ritual elders, seasonal leaders, or rotating ceremonial roles. Discussions of matrilineal systems in any of these civilizations require special caution because lineage organization is rarely visible in pure archaeology, and inferences depend on careful comparison with ethnographic data. Three theories cover the spectrum. The mainstream view holds that many of these peoples were complex but non-state civilizations, with sophisticated organization and limited centralized power. An archaeological and social interpretation, increasingly prominent in recent comparative work, argues that authority among these civilizations was distributed through households, ritual groups, and kinship networks. A speculative reading proposes that some of these were peaceful goddess civilizations or lost egalitarian utopias, an angle useful as hypothesis, but not as conclusion. The modern relevance is direct. These civilizations complicate the assumption that civilization automatically equals domination, and that history is necessarily a story of kings and armies. Prehistory, it appears, experimented with more forms of human civilization than later states allowed to survive. That experimentation reshapes the larger story. What these civilizations change about the human story. The simple ladder model of progress, in which agriculture leads to surplus, surplus leads to cities, cities lead to writing, and writing leads to civilization, does not survive contact with these 10 peoples. The Göbekli Tepe builders show that a civilization's ritual architecture can precede its farming, with hunter-gatherers quarrying and erecting multi-ton pillars before clear domestication of plants and animals in the region. The Norte Chico show that cities, including monumental platform mounds and sunken plazas, can house a civilization without pottery and without obvious warfare. The Liangzhu show hydraulic engineering on a regional scale before the first historical Chinese dynasties enter the written record. The Doggerlanders and Sundalanders show that entire human civilizations can vanish before they are remembered in any text. The Atlit Yam People show that submerged civilizations can preserve intimate village life, including a stone-lined well, ritual megaliths, and a mother and infant carrying ancient tuberculosis bacteria. The Çatalhöyük People show urban density without streets, with thousands of members of a civilization moving across a roof-level public space. The Vinča show metallurgy and a structured symbolic system several centuries before. Securely deciphered writing appears in Eurasia. The Cucuteni-Trypillia show large planned settlements without obvious kings, fortresses, or royal tombs. The Gunung Padang builders show how geology, sacred tradition, and archaeology can collide in a single hill, generating decades of debate about who they actually were. The unifying technical theme is straightforward. Across these 10 civilizations, humans repeatedly used local materials according to natural laws. Volcanic columns, fractured by cooling lava in West Java, became terraces for the Gunung Padang builders. Mud brick, made from the local clay of the Konya Plain, became roof-connected cities for the Çatalhöyük people. Limestone, quarried from Anatolian bedrock, became ritual pillars for the Göbekli Tepe builders. Jade, sourced from regional deposits and worked by abrasion, became an instrument of sacred authority for the Liangzhu. Cotton, grown in Andean valleys, became fishing infrastructure that fed the coastal Norte Chico. Water, depending on context, became both engine and destroyer for all of them, supporting paddies and wells and then erasing villages and shorelines. Three theoretical frames apply across the entire set of civilizations. Mainstream archaeology explains most of these peoples through environmental conditions and social cooperation, with their monuments, cities, and crafts emerging from cumulative innovation. An archaeological and historical reading adds the role of memory, ritual, and migration, treating each civilization as a node in larger webs of cultural exchange and inheritance. A speculative position asks whether lost civilizations still lie in places archaeology has barely reached, including deep continental shelves, jungle interiors, and unexcavated mounds. Each frame has a place in the conversation. Long before written history, these peoples were already experimenting with the same fundamental forces: stone, water, fire, food, labor, and memory. Civilization was not a single invention. It was a series of human civilizations, each finding its own solutions to the physics of survival.